The words hung in the air like the slow, inevitable creak of a rusted door swinging shut. Final. Irrevocable. We're bringing in someone younger for your role, Kay. After 10 years, it's time to move on. The sentence felt like a slap, sharp, stinging, and laced with an arrogance that made my stomach tighten. I stood frozen in the doorway of Thomas Miller's office, my knuckles whitening around the strap of my leather portfolio. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too sterile, making the moment feel strangely surreal, as if I were merely watching it unfold rather than living it. I had known this day might come. After all, the corporate world thrived on efficiency, not loyalty. But knowing something was possible didn't make it any less gut-wrenching when it finally arrived. 10 years of dedication, of late nights and early mornings, of problem-solving my way through crises that others had deemed impossible, reduced to nothing more than an HR script delivered with rehearsed sympathy. Thomas leaned back in his chair, hands folded across his stomach, exuding the smug self-satisfaction of a man who had already moved on to his next meeting in his mind. "Kay, please sit down," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. I didn't move. "I assume there's a reason beyond my performance?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fire simmering in my chest. Thomas offered a practiced sigh. "This isn't about performance. It's about progress, fresh perspectives, innovation." His lips curled ever so slightly. "You understand. I understood perfectly. Someone younger." The words tasted bitter as I spoke them. His grin widened, as if he had won some private battle. "She's bright, ambitious, just graduated from Berkeley. Olivia Parker. I know you'll do the right thing and help her transition into the role." I let the name roll through my mind. Olivia Parker. A name I had never heard before. A woman, barely past her graduation robes, was to replace me, someone who had spent a decade sculpting the backbone of this department. The injustice of it seared through me, but I refused to let it show. I had spent too long in boardrooms, navigating the delicate balance between intelligence and restraint, to crumble now. My breath came slow and even. Control was power. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I nodded, the faintest of smiles playing at my lips. Of course. Something flickered across Thomas's face. Surprise? Disappointment? He had expected a fight. Maybe even a desperate plea. But I was giving him none of that. "Good," he said, glancing back at his screen, already dismissing me. "HR will be in touch about your severance package. We'll make the announcement at Monday's department meeting." I smoothed the front of my blazer, adjusting a cuff with meticulous care. "And the board meeting next Thursday? That's still on at 2 o'clock? His eyes snapped back to mine, a brief flicker of confusion crossing his expression. "Yes, but that's not something you need to concern yourself with anymore. Just making sure my calendar is correct," I said lightly. "Will CEO Davis be in attendance?" Thomas hesitated, as if trying to gauge my angle. "Yes, she will." I nodded again, turning toward the door. "I appreciate the notice, Thomas." I walked out without another word, my heels clicking against the polished floor in a steady rhythm. My heart should have been pounding, my mind racing with panic, but instead, I felt something entirely unexpected: calm. Because what Thomas didn't know, what nobody in this department knew, was that this story was far from over. 3 weeks ago, I had received a call that changed everything. The rooftop garden had been quiet that Sunday afternoon, a rare moment of solitude. My phone buzzed, an unfamiliar number flashing across the screen. I had almost ignored it. Almost. "Kay, we need to talk about your future at Peterson," a voice had said. Catherine Davis, the CEO. Now, as I walked back to my desk, I could already picture Thomas's expression when he realized just how wrong he had been to dismiss me. The countdown to the board meeting had begun, and with it, the unraveling of his carefully laid plans. Let him enjoy his victory while he could. In just a few days, everything would change. The rooftop garden was bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within me. 3 weeks ago, I had been tending to my basil plants when my phone buzzed. I barely glanced at the unknown number before dismissing it until something in my gut told me to pick up. "Kay, we need to talk about your future at Peterson." The voice was unmistakable: Catherine Davis, CEO of Peterson Engineering. A call from her was as rare as a quiet morning in the office. I straightened, my fingers tightening around the watering can. "Catherine," I said, keeping my voice even, This is unexpected, not as unexpected as what Thomas has planned for you, she replied, her tone sharp yet measured. Can you meet me at Bayview Cafe tomorrow at 7 a.m.? That was all she had said before ending the call. No explanation. No small talk. Just a command disguised as an invitation. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, nerves taut as I spotted her in the corner booth. Catherine Davis was a woman of calculated precision, her presence alone enough to silence a room. Today, she wasn't wearing her usual corporate mask. There was no boardroom veneer, no polished press release smile, just sharp eyes and a coffee cup held between her fingers like a ticking clock. She wasted no time. We're restructuring leadership at Peterson Kaye. The board has been monitoring your work, especially on the Westlake project. You've saved this company millions. You see what others miss. We need that at the top. I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. Are you offering you a seat at the table? Yes. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. As Chief Operations Officer, effective after the next board meeting. The words landed like a hammer strike, each syllable reshaping the reality I thought I understood. Why me? Catherine sipped her coffee, eyes never leaving mine. Because you've earned it. And because Thomas has underestimated you. She didn't have to elaborate. I knew Thomas had his allies on the board, men who would rather promote their golf buddies than acknowledge the contributions of those who had actually built this company. If they got wind of my promotion too soon, they would move against it, which meant one thing. This has to stay quiet, I murmured. Catherine nodded. Until the board vote. Yes. You'll still go to work as if nothing has changed. Train Olivia, tie up loose ends, and let Thomas think he's won. A slow smile crept across my lips. And when the board meeting happens? Then, Catherine said, leaning back, we let the walls come down around him. For 3 weeks, I played my role flawlessly. I attended meetings, handed over project files, and smiled through every condescending remark from Thomas. I watched as he strutted through the office, already reveling in his perceived victory. I shook hands with Olivia, a bright-eyed young woman who had no idea she was a pawn in a much larger game. Every evening, after the office emptied, I met with Catherine and the legal team. We drafted new operational policies, assessed structural inefficiencies, and built a transition plan that would make my takeover seamless. I pored over confidential reports, analyzing every weak link in the system, many of which led straight to Thomas's mismanagement. By the time my farewell party rolled around complete with stale supermarket cupcakes and lukewarm coffee, I was prepared. We'll miss you, Kaye, Javier said, handing me a generic card filled with obligatory well wishes. He lowered his voice. Are you really okay with this? I smiled, sipping my coffee. Oh, I'm more than okay. Thomas lingered near the break room doorway, checking his watch, clearly impatient for my departure. He had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything he had orchestrated would crumble. When he finally called me into his office, I walked in with the same calm he had mistaken for resignation. I wanted to personally thank you for handling this transition professionally, he said, barely masking his smirk. Your severance package is generous, 2 months' salary, plus unused vacation days. The paperwork will be ready tomorrow. I tilted my head, studying him. I appreciate that. His smirk faltered slightly. I have to say, you've been surprisingly composed about all this. Did you see it coming? I allowed myself a small smile. Let's just say I've learned to prepare for all contingencies. His eyes narrowed, suspicion creeping in. But before he could question me further, his phone buzzed a reminder for the board meeting tomorrow. He barely spared me another glance as I left his office. Back at my desk, I checked my phone. A single message from Catherine. Conference room AONE, 30 p.m. Use the executive entrance. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and took a slow breath. The pieces were set. The plan was in motion. Tomorrow, Thomas Miller would walk into that boardroom thinking he had secured his empire, and he would walk out with nothing. The boardroom at Peterson Engineering was a temple of power mahogany paneled walls, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and a polished table large enough to seat 12 of the most influential minds in the company. It was a room where careers were forged, where decisions rippled through the entire industry, and today it would be the stage for a downfall. At precisely 1:55 p.m., I entered through the executive entrance, as Catherine had instructed. The moment my heels clicked against the marble floor, a few heads turned. Some nodded in recognition. Others, particularly those aligned with Thomas, stiffened slightly, sensing an unspoken shift in the air. Catherine stood at the far end of the room, her expression composed yet keenly alert. She gestured to the empty seat beside her, my seat. I took it without hesitation, placing my leather portfolio on the table with deliberate precision. Across from me, the chairman of the board, William Harrison, offered a slight nod of approval. At exactly 2:00 p.m., the main doors swung open. Thomas walked in with the confidence of a man who believed he had already won. His navy blue suit was crisp, his posture straight, and his mouth already forming the smug smile I had seen too many times before. He greeted several board members by name as he made his way around the table, setting his quarterly report in front of each one. Then, he saw me. His steps faltered for a fraction of a second, just enough for me to notice. His eyes flickered with confusion, then something darker. Panic, perhaps. He recovered quickly, forcing his signature grin back into place, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind, scrambling to understand why I was here, in this seat, at this meeting. Kaye, he said, forcing an easy tone. Didn't expect to see you here. I folded my hands atop my portfolio, meeting his gaze evenly. Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world. Before he could probe further, Catherine stood, commanding the room with her presence. Let's begin. Thomas hesitated for a moment before finally taking his seat, 2 chairs down from me. His fingers drummed lightly against his report folder, his mind clearly working overtime. The meeting began with routine updates, financials, project developments, market analysis. Thomas presented his department's performance report, speaking with his usual air of confidence. But there was something else now, a slight stiffness to his voice, an awareness that something was off. Then came the shift. Catherine set her tablet down and folded her hands, her expression unreadable. Before we move forward, I have an important announcement regarding leadership restructuring. The silence that followed was thick with anticipation. As you all know, Peterson Engineering has been evaluating its executive team, ensuring we have the right leaders to take us into the future. After careful consideration, the board has unanimously approved a change that will directly impact our operational leadership. Thomas sat up straighter. He knew something was wrong now, but he hadn't put all the pieces together yet. Catherine turned toward me. I'm pleased to officially welcome Kaye Thompson as our new Chief Operations Officer. The words hit like a thunderclap. A beat of silence passed before murmurs spread across the table. A few board members nodded approvingly. Others exchanged unreadable glances. But my focus was solely on Thomas. His entire face went slack. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open, as if the words had physically knocked the air out of his lungs. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. His reaction was satisfaction enough. Catherine continued, her voice smooth as silk. As coup, Kaye will oversee all operational aspects of the company, including engineering, production, and project execution. All department heads will now report directly to her. Thomas's grip on his report folder tightened until his knuckles turned white. He swallowed hard, struggling to keep his composure. I wasn't aware of this reorganization, he finally managed, his voice slightly hoarse. That's understandable, Catherine said with a measured nod. The decision was finalized on a need-to-know basis 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, the exact moment he had begun orchestrating my replacement. William Harrison, the chairman, leaned forward, adjusting his reading glasses. Miss Thompson's work on the Westlake project demonstrated an unparalleled level of strategic vision and execution. Her leadership has been instrumental in securing several high-profile contracts. The board believes she is uniquely qualified to lead our operational divisions into the next phase of growth. I finally spoke, keeping my voice calm, professional. I look forward to working with all department heads to ensure a seamless transition. Thomas's eyes met mine, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Catherine wasn't done. With that in mind, there are some personnel changes we need to address. I turned to face the board. Thomas recently proposed replacing our senior design engineer, my previous role, with a new graduate who has no industry experience. Given the Westlake project's critical phase, I believe a more experienced lead is necessary. William Harrison frowned. Is this accurate, Thomas? Thomas visibly tensed. I believed fresh perspectives would benefit the team. That's valuable, I said smoothly. But in this case, Stability is paramount. I've already spoken with Diana Ford about stepping into the role. Her 15 years of experience make her the logical choice. Catherine nodded. I support this decision. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. The decision was made. Thomas had been outmaneuvered on every front, his powers systematically dismantled in a matter of minutes. The meeting continued, but the energy in the room had shifted. Board members now directed their questions to me rather than Thomas. His voice grew quieter, his presence shrinking under the weight of his own defeat. By the time the meeting adjourned, he looked like a man who had just realized the empire he thought he controlled had been an illusion all along. As the room emptied, Catherine turned to me, her voice low. That was masterful. I picked up my portfolio and smiled faintly. He thought he was setting a trap. Turns out, he was walking into mine. Tomorrow, the company-wide announcement would make everything official. But today? Today was the day Thomas Miller lost everything. The company-wide meeting was set for 9. Oh, I'm sharp. But by 8:30, the main auditorium was already buzzing with hushed conversations and speculative whispers. Employees from every department had gathered, their curiosity mounting with each passing minute. The email from Catherine had been cryptic, exciting organizational changes and new leadership announcements. No one knew exactly what to expect, but the tension in the air was palpable. I stood backstage with Catherine and the executive team, dressed in a navy blue suit that struck the perfect balance between authority and familiarity. This wasn't just any promotion. This was a declaration, a message to every person in the company that experience and strategy still mattered. That corporate backstabbing wouldn't always go unpunished. Ready? Catherine asked, adjusting her blazer. I exhaled slowly, my pulse steady, more than ever. At precisely 9:00 am, Catherine took the stage, the murmur of voices dissolving into attentive silence. She was a natural speaker, clear, composed, commanding. Good morning, everyone. As we step into a new chapter at Peterson Engineering, I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible talent and dedication that has driven our success. A polite round of applause followed, but the anticipation remained thick in the room. Catherine continued, in our commitment to innovation and excellence, we've restructured our leadership to better align with our long-term vision. With that in mind, I'm thrilled to introduce our new Chief Operations Officer, Kaye Thompson. The moment my name left her lips, a ripple of surprise shot through the crowd. For a fraction of a second, there was silence, then an eruption of applause. Engineers, project managers, administrative staff faces I had worked with for years stood and clapped, some even cheering. Their reaction was genuine, unfiltered. In the third row, Thomas sat rigidly, his clapping slow, mechanical, his expression unreadable. Gone was the smugness, the casual arrogance. In its place, a man desperately trying to maintain composure while the ground beneath him collapsed. I walked onto the stage, shaking Catherine's hand before stepping to the podium. The applause swelled again, and for a moment, I let it wash over me. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a reckoning. Thank you, I began, my voice carrying across the room with steady confidence. For 10 years, I've had the privilege of working alongside some of the brightest minds in this industry. Today, I'm honored to help shape our collective future. I spoke of teamwork, of bridging experience with fresh perspectives, of ensuring that no one in this company would ever be discarded simply because of a number on their resume. And as I spoke, I let my gaze drift, locking onto Thomas's just long enough for him to understand. I won. After the meeting, employees approached me, offering congratulations, shaking my hand, expressing their relief that leadership had made the right decision. Olivia Parker, the young woman Thomas had intended to replace me with, hesitated near the stage, uncertainty in her eyes. Miss Thompson, Kaye, she corrected herself. I'm a little unclear about my role now. I offered her a reassuring smile. Let's meet in my office in an hour. I think you have great potential, just not in the position Thomas originally proposed. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she nodded. Thank you. As the crowd began to disperse, Javier approached, a knowing grin on his face. I knew you had something up your sleeve, he said. But damn, that was spectacular. I chuckled. Let's just say patience has its rewards. By noon, I had settled into my new office on the executive floor, a corner suite, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bay. It was a stark contrast to my previous cubicle, but I made sure to bring one thing with me. a small jade plant that had sat on my old desk for years. A reminder of where I had started and how far I had come. Just as I was reviewing my afternoon agenda, Catherine appeared in the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "1 week in," she said, handing me a cup. "How does it feel?" I took a sip, savoring the moment. "Challenging, in all the right ways." She smiled. "The board is impressed. William Harrison specifically mentioned your ability to ask the right questions." "I've had years to think about what I'd do differently if given the chance," I admitted. Catherine nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "Oh, and one more thing you might find this interesting. Thomas has requested a transfer to our Seattle office." I raised an eyebrow. "Running away?" "He claims it's for family reasons," Catherine said, smirking slightly. "But we both know better." I leaned back in my chair, considering the news. "Let's approve it. Sometimes a fresh start benefits everyone." Catherine raised her coffee cup in a small toast. Spoken like a true executive, I clinked my cup against hers, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. The game had been played, the board reset. And this time, I was the one making the moves. The sun had barely risen over the San Francisco skyline when I stepped into my office, the weight of victory settling into my bones. A week had passed since the board meeting the day Thomas Miller lost everything. The whispers in the hallways had begun to die down, replaced by a renewed energy, a shift in momentum. People who once walked on eggshells around Thomas now carried themselves differently, more assured, more open. The air felt lighter. The tension that had hung like a storm cloud over the engineering department for years had dissipated. And yet, there was one final piece to this game. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my morning coffee as my inbox chimed with a new email. Subject: official transfer, Thomas Miller. It was done. Effective immediately, Thomas was being reassigned to Peterson's Seattle office. No farewell party, no grand send-off. Just a quiet exit for a man who had once believed himself untouchable. I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction before refocusing. There was still work to be done. At 10:00 a.m., I called my first executive meeting as coup. Every department head, every key decision maker was in attendance. The room, once a place where Thomas dominated with his overbearing presence, was now mine to command. "Let's talk strategy," I began, scanning the faces before me. "We're not just restructuring leadership, we're redefining how we operate. The era of protecting egos over progress is over. Our future depends on collaboration, innovation, and valuing the experience that built this company." I saw nods, some hesitant, others firm. It would take time, but they would adjust. Javier, my ever-loyal ally, leaned back in his chair with a grin. "So, does that mean we finally get proper budget allocations for the Westlake expansion?" I smirked. "Consider it done." Laughter rippled through the room, a rare and welcome sound. The mood was shifting, and with it, the future of Peterson Engineering. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and strategic planning. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was finally alone in my office. I exhaled slowly, letting the quiet settle around me. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Catherine stood there, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Thought you could use this." I accepted the cup with a grateful smile. "You always know exactly when to show up." She stepped inside, taking a seat across from me. "You did well, Kaye. The board is impressed." More than that, the employees are relieved. They see the change, and they're on board with it. I nodded, taking a slow sip of coffee. I won't pretend it was easy, but it was necessary. Catherine studied me for a moment before setting her cup down. "And what about you? What's next?" I let out a small chuckle. "You mean now that I've orchestrated a corporate coup?" She smirked. "Something like that." I leaned forward, my voice steady. "Now I build. I didn't take this role just to prove a point. I took it because this company deserves better. Because people like Olivia, like Javier, deserve to work in a place where they're valued. And because, after everything, I still believe in what we do here." Catherine nodded slowly, approval clear in her eyes. "Then I think you're exactly where you need to be." As she stood to leave, she hesitated. "One last thing, you know, Thomas won't go quietly. He may be in Seattle now, but men like him don't let go of grudges easily." I met her gaze, unwavering. "Let him hold on to his grudges. I'll be too busy running this company to care." Catherine smiled, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "I'll drink to that." She left, and I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. The battle was over, but my work was just beginning. Thomas had built his empire on arrogance, on the belief that his power was absolute. But power, real power, didn't come from manipulation or fear. It came from respect, from vision, from knowing when to strike and when to build. And as I sat there, the weight of the past lifting from my shoulders, I knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.